Okay, hi folks. It's Monday, and Monday always means it's a Chen chat day. So hopefully we're live, which will be good. The date today, more for my record, I think really is probably the 18th of August 2025. So yet another week flies by. Just going to wait a few moments to get a few people logged in. Again, comment-wise, obviously feel free to pop comments in the chat, and I'll do my best to cover them and answer them. So this week, what we're going to talk about this week. So this week, interestingly, Chen wanted to talk about psychic surgery, which since we do psychic surgery every day, and I guess we never talk about it very often, I thought it was probably quite a good topic to cover, probably in a bit more depth, I guess, than we do normally, really. So when we get people logged in, we'll move that conversation on. So if you've got questions about psychic surgery, what psychic surgery is, our version, I guess, of psychic surgery, different people have different explanations, I think, as to what they consider to be psychic surgery and the way they do things. And of course, we've got the old world as well, which was the world of a scalpel, something sharp that created blood. It was done generally in various places like the Philippines. So psychic surgery kind of emanated from that space or from that geographical location. And of course, there's lots of stories of psychic surgeons that have a kind of Philippines base that were doing really good work. And then, of course, there's also stories of people in the same space that were doing more nefarious type of work that they considered to be psychic surgery. So I think we're going to get an interesting conversation in. Obviously, what we'll do is we'll go through as we do most weeks, really, we'll go through my kind of version of how I work, what I do, and my kind of 3D perception. And then in the latter part of this conversation, we'll get Chen in to have a quick chat to give you his version of what he considers psychic surgery to be and the way that we kind of perform psychic surgery today, really. So it's going to be interesting, I think. Just going to wait for Chen's online. Okay, so Chen's online for me anyway. Just going to wait for Jane to give me a quick heads up that the sound is working. It should be good. We can do that. All destinations, perfect. Okay, there we go. Sounds good today. Your arm keeps disappearing into the clouds. I know this is the use of a magic background that comes and goes a bit. I think my chair disappears as well. Let me just see if I can turn the background off a moment. We can work out how to do that. It's always a setting for everything these days. Okay, so there we go. It's back to my my room, hopefully. Cool. Okay. So if I just move this one, there we go, middle of the screen. Okay, so that looks better from a kind of visual representation perspective. Say hi to Vanessa. Vanessa's had a few health challenges recently, so wish you all the best, Nessie. Hope you're on recovery mode. Good to get some downtime, some rest, which will be good. So our thoughts are kind of with you from that perspective. And okay, yep, perfect. So I think, yeah, so go back to psychic surgery. So kind of psychic surgery. So when I first started to do the work on my own spiritual path, really, one of the things that I did was obviously did different meditation courses over years, really, and then crystal therapy, crystal meditation, working with crystals, and that kind of led me to Reiki. And I guess we call that Reiki now in SRA. Reiki is the kind of like the gateway drug to the work that we do, really. So Reiki is a kind of energetic healing modality that lots of people perform, lots of people understand. And Reiki is all about kind of using universal life force energy, I think, generally. And you kind of channel that energy through your hands. So Reiki is also being accepted by the UK National Health Service. So Reiki does have this platform that people can talk about it. You're not considered to be too fringe if you do Reiki. And then, of course, are thousands, probably hundreds of thousands of Reiki practitioners all over the world. So Reiki is a good thing as a starting point, really. So I started to perform Reiki, started to have people come to me that worked in our shed, basically, from the garden that we had. And I put my hands on, I'd do Reiki, and we'd see some good results. Reiki's good, very good for moving energy. It's quite good for kind of unblocking spiritual blocks, that kind of thing. So I really enjoyed performing Reiki. And of course, there are 3 levels to Reiki for most places, I think. Reiki 1, Reiki 2, and then Reiki Master. So I did all 3. Did Reiki 1, practiced a bit, then did Reiki 2, practitioner, and then moved to Reiki 3, sort of master, effectively. At that point, you can then teach Reiki. So I didn't really ever get on to, or move into teaching Reiki. But what happened to me really personally was, as I started to perform Reiki quite a lot for people, I noticed that I'd start to feel quite blank mentally, and my hands would feel quite dead. And of course, Reiki is about moving around the bed, doing different hand positions on someone. And obviously you can use symbols, Reiki symbols that you can kind of intentionally put into someone's field as well. So I sort of started to notice that my Reiki changed. And that was when I realized that as I was doing meditation, and by that point I was doing trance kind of work, or learning to do trance meditation, trance configuration healing, Chen started to come through and take over. And then for me, it wasn't very long before I wasn't really doing Reiki, I was doing something else. But I didn't kind of know what the something else was at the time. I just used to put my hands on someone, regardless of what they turned up with from a kind of symptom perspective. I would start by doing Reiki in my own mind, and then Chen would kind of come along and he'd basically take over my hands. At that point, he was only kind of taking over my hands in more of like an overshadowed trance version. So he wasn't coming completely in, taking over and talking to people, but he was just using my hands basically as an instrument, effectively. So that was his kind of method of starting to do what he then called psychic surgery that I'd never heard of before. So just going to say hi to a few people. So hi to Pat, thanks for joining. Motivational Mindset, which is Naval, I think. Hi Naval, good to see you. And Sharp Rust. Sharp Rust sounds good, from Australia. And there's also Tara Marie, and of course Miriam. Great to see Miriam, and Natasha. So great to have you guys on board. So just kind of going over really my kind of version of psychic surgery, how that kind of worked for me and what started that. So started to work with all these people, and I'd kind of space out. Chen would take over. And one day I said to him, what are we actually doing here? Because I'm starting off by advertising my services as a kind of Reiki practitioner. When people turn up, you're basically taking over my hands and doing something different, which generally meant there was lots of movement, and people started to give me feedback that they could feel his hands moving inside them, and they could feel things being pulled, like tight sensations, almost as though his hands were in the body and they were kind of pulling things out. And one day Chen basically said, well, we call this psychic surgery. And I kind of laughed and thought, well, I can't use a scalpel to start with, because obviously we're in the UK. We're not allowed to cut anyone unless we're medically qualified, which of course I'm not. So I'm not going to be doing any chopping and cutting or anything like that. And he said, no, this is the modern version of psychic surgery. So he called it psychic surgery because we're performing surgery on the etheric body. So he was explaining to me at the time, which I didn't really understand then, obviously I do now, that we have this etheric field that's kind of a blueprint copy of the physical body, and everything that happens with the physical is already happened in the etheric. And therefore, if you perform some sort of intervention on the etheric field, the changes that you make are then going to basically vibrate through to the physical and change things. So if we think about something that's growing on your body, if in the etheric, the spirit guide team basically cut the blood supply off to that thing that's growing on your body, whether that be a tumor or lump or something, benign lump, then of course that lump is going to get no blood supply, and obviously it's going to kind of be incorporated back into the normal human body or fall off. So in the same way that we can think of with skin tags, if you've got a skin tag, you can tie a piece of string around it, pull it tight, cut the blood supply off the skin tag. After a few days with no blood supply, basically it kind of drops off effectively. So same sort of thing with the tumours and those sorts of ideas. So Chen kind of explained this is what we're doing basically, and this is effectively the way that we're planning to work. So kind of moving from Reiki, which is kind of energy healing, this is more around, or at that point it was more around working with spirit guides, allowing them to take over your physical body and kind of work through you. So at the time that I started to do this, we're kind of going back probably 20 years ago, I guess, there was nobody that I knew that did psychic surgery. So I kind of felt like I was struggling to find anyone that could explain how this works, what we're doing. And there was a guy called Stephen Turoff in the UK, and he considers himself to be a psychic surgeon. He'd written books on psychic surgery. So I kind of started to follow him and think, I'll read what he does. And he used to talk about things in the same way, except he did used to use a scalpel. So one day, I played football in my past quite a lot, so I've got kind of clicky knees. So one day, Jane and I went to Spain on holiday, and lo and behold, Stephen Turoff was running he had a centre in Coin near Malaga, basically in Spain, a kind of healing retreat where he performed psychic surgery. So I said, right, we need to go and see what he's doing. So we went along, turned up in this waiting room with all these other Spanish people, basically. And I was really excited because I thought I'm going to get to see Stephen Turoff. He's a kind of renowned psychic surgeon. We're in his healing centre in Spain. This is going to be really cool. I can ask him all these questions about what's happening to me and how I now have this spirit guide called Chen that's kind of performing psychic surgery through me. So I had these like fantastic ideas and was pretty excited. And of course, as all things tend to happen, the kind of opposite happened really. So one day the door opened, or whilst we've been waiting, the door opened. Jane and I were kind of ushered through to a treatment room with a couch. We didn't really speak any Spanish. Their English wasn't great either. So basically explained that I was going to hop up on the couch. He was going to come in. I was going to kind of point to what was wrong with my body. Jane was sat next to me. So kind of I was expecting to have this quite long chat with him. But of course, he was in trance. So Stephen Turoff, again, had a guide that worked with him in trance. And it was a German doctor. I can't remember his name now, but again, you can Google his name. But anyway, he walked in the room. Clearly, it wasn't Stephen. He was basically in a sort of trance-like state. He walked in with this kind of rusty old scalpel thing in his hand, and I'm sort of looking at it thinking, wow, I don't really want you to use that on me particularly. And next thing I know, he's basically kind of grabs my knee, makes an incision with this kind of rusty knife, but it didn't kind of go into the skin. There was no blood, but I felt serious pain, like really, really, like he just cut me open. I was really in quite excruciating pain. And of course, Jane's looking concerned next to me. And what had started off to be a kind of fun laugh wasn't that at all. And literally, he kind of threw some things in the bin behind him, but they weren't physical. And the bin kind of made a noise, as I recollect, but there was nothing in the bin particularly. And then he basically, without even speaking to us, just walked out of the room. And I was still lying on the bed, holding my knee in excruciating pain. Jane didn't know what to say. And basically, we paid, because I think it was by donations, we paid basically like 50 euros or something at the time. And I kind of hopped up off the couch and hobbled out, and we kind of walked out of this centre, and all this had happened in about 2 minutes. So like in 2 minutes flat, we'd gone from thinking that I'd be talking to Stephen about psychic surgery to having psychic surgery to feeling pretty excruciating pain, and then being sort of sat outside on a hot day, sun sort of blazing down my face, and there was a red mark all the way down my knee where he kind of pulled this scalpel down. So I didn't know if the red mark was there because he pulled this scalpel across it or whether something had happened. But obviously, case in point was about a few hours later, we went back to our hotel, sat by the pool, my knee started to feel better, and it kind of stopped clicking. And then over a couple of days, the red mark disappeared. So we were sort of left a little bit shocked as to had we had psychic surgery, had he actually done something. There was certainly an effect that didn't appear to be, from my perspective, really. I could feel a change. I'd certainly felt pain as though I'd had an operation. So for me, it kind of left me a bit shocked, really, as to what psychic surgery was and the fact that I just kind of received it off of a renowned psychic surgeon. But this wasn't what I was doing. So when I came back to the UK, talking to Chen in trance, and I said, this is not what we're doing. We're not using scalpels that are rusty. We're not throwing things into bins. Like, there's no way we're going to do that in the UK, basically. And Chen said, that's okay, because the modern version of psychic surgery that we're going to work through you using will be literally, you put your hands on somebody on their stomach. You don't need to move across the bed or around the bed. I will come in as your spirit guide and take over your body in full trance. And I will communicate with the person that's having psychic surgery, and then he will actually perform what he called basically a spiritual surgery on that etheric body. So that was the kind of general gist as to what what we were going to do and how we were going to work. Obviously, I had no idea about any of these things at the time. I said, okay, that's what we're going to do. That's fine. And then we started to have clients turn up generally on weekends. I'd want to take them out to the healing kind of shed, effectively, that was in the garden. They'd hop up on the couch. Chen would come in and he'd basically do all sorts of things with people, but just putting my hands on their stomachs. There was no moving around the bed, and he'd have conversations with people. And obviously then people would give us feedback, and they'd tell us what had happened. And of course the feedback started to be quite good and explainable, really, for quite a lot of people. And obviously we started to realize that this was effectively psychic surgery, but not the kind of the physical version that involves blood and gore and throwing things around. This is literally psychic surgery that you can't see because it's happening on the etheric field. And then certainly in the UK, a few people got in contact with me, a guy called Gary Mannion and a guy called Nina Nolan, who are both psychic surgeons. And we talked about the concept of setting up an organization between the three of us to actually kind of validate psychic surgery so that we could get insurance. And that's what we did. We actually created an organization called UPS, UUPS, so UK United Psychic Surgeons. And the idea was that we went to Westminster Insurance at the time and actually provided them with a whole lot of documentation and created a protocol, code of conduct, all of the things that you need to do to get insurance. So that was kind of like a first in the UK, that we actually created insurance for psychic surgeons and also created an organization for psychic surgeons and psychic surgery. And the idea at the time, I think, really from my perspective, and I know from Chen's too, was that we were going to create this big group of people, probably that came from Reiki, that we could teach to perform psychic surgery. Because if you can do Reiki, you're already moving energy, you already understand universal life force energy in terms of how you work with it and the method. You're doing hands-on work as well, of course. And the idea was that we could take people who were Reiki trained and then kind of move them into psychic surgery, hook them up with a spirit guide, get them to do some trance work, probably put them on some sort of like mediumship course, so they could then start to basically talk to and communicate with their spirit guides, although that wasn't really essential at the time. So talking to a spirit guide is a nice to have with telepathy, but if you can't do that, potentially what we planned to do was to basically connect a Reiki practitioner with their spirit guide and set the whole thing up from behind the scenes, so that when they put their hands on someone and they obviously run through their protection, do the things they need to do, then the spirit guide will come in, take over that Reiki practitioner's hands, and then start to perform psychic surgery on the person. So that was always the kind of intention at the time. It was quite a focused intention. And of course, this way we're looking at removing, rather than just channeling energy, as Reiki would be, the surgery would involve removing blocks, attachments, distortions, anything that kind of prevents the client from healing properly, and of course connecting to their higher self. So I guess if we look at the first versions of psychic surgery that we did, the version we now work from an SRA perspective, obviously when I connected to Dr. Palmer, that was the next move forward, really. So it was kind of almost like psychic surgery, because we were looking at the etheric field of the client to find out where the problems were and whether the client was connected to their higher self, and then obviously resolving the problems. And that's when we started to realize that attachments, entities, all of those sorts of things were becoming quite a big problem, and they were actually stopping that connection to the higher self. And then we realized that entities and attachments, discarnate spirits, were just the kind of tip of the iceberg, because there were so many more layers of problems that people had in their field. So the start for me, really, of psychic surgery with Chen kind of was the starting point for the protocol that was then developed to work with Dr. Palmer. And that protocol then ended up with kind of 20 different layers. So we would look at entity attachments, we'd look at discarnate spirit attachments, we'd look for curses in the field and curses that were coming in, we'd look for portals, we started to identify interdimensional parasites as well, and then we'd obviously look at the normal things, so chakras that were blocked, past life problems, ancestral problems. So there's a whole list about 20 things really that we can kind of work through from a psychic surgery perspective. And then of course that became the SRA protocol effectively. So that was the kind of the transition really from my perspective from what would be just a starting point of Reiki into psychic surgery. And I think now psychic surgery is something that we probably need to explore again, really, because there are people like myself, and of course when I met Jono, Obviously, he was a psychic surgeon. Him and I have been on the same path to a certain degree, actually. So he'd been doing psychic surgery for years and years and years, probably again 20 years or something. He'd been doing trance mediumship for years. He'd been to meditation groups for years, like I had. So we've both been following the same path in different geographical locations, but doing the same type of thing. And if we look at Reiki practitioners that already have a higher vibration, linking them with a spirit guide that can then work through their hands and perform psychic surgery is quite easily taught, really. And it's something that we've kind of talked about as to, how we can get more people doing this type of work, because ultimately we know that there are so many people out that need help, and some of the conventional help, isn't really going to work that well. If people have a spiritual problem, a spiritual source to the problem, if they have an attachment, an entity, interdimensional parasites, curses, then medication obviously isn't going to resolve those problems. And this is where things like the SRA protocol comes in, so connecting to SRA practitioners, and of course psychic surgery sort of aligns itself quite nicely in that same kind of space, really. So I think it's a kind of, again, it's almost like a step up from things like meditation to Reiki to psychic surgery, and then psychic surgery kind of sort of splits off, I guess, to the SRA work, which effectively is considered to be the next step, removing anything that's negative in the field at all, but doing so with spirit guides that we obviously connect with and work with. So that kind of was my progression from Reiki into psychic surgery, and hopefully it kind of explains what psychic surgery is really from my perspective. And I think when we book, or people book appointments with us, quite often they're a little bit confused as to what they actually book in. Are they booking a psychic surgery session, or are they booking a spiritual clearing, SRT? And again, the water does get a bit muddy in some of those places. So I'm just going to say hi to Zane, Hope, and Helene. Good to have you guys on as well. So I think from my perspective, obviously, looking at those two areas, there is a distinction between both to a certain degree. And obviously that's what we can kind of explore as we talk about those different things. So for me, psychic surgery is more around physical things to a certain degree. I know the way that John works his appointments, psychic surgery for him is working on physical problems, tumours, issues, that type of thing. SRT is more about spiritual source problems, really. So things like attachments, entities, curses, that type of thing. But again, if we look at the way that the work is happening in spirit, from my perspective, my spirit guide Chen obviously is connecting to a client's field, and when he scans their field, he's looking for negativity in different frequencies. So if we think about someone's vibration, a person has lots of different vibratory frequencies that kind of encompass their etheric field. So the spirit guides come in and they start off with one thing. Is there any interference from an entity perspective on vibration 5? Yes, there is. Okay, how many entities are in vibration 5? There's one connected. So let's clear and remove that entity and free up that vibration. So now vibration 5 as an example that's been cleared. Then they go on to the next frequency. Okay, do we have any discarnate spirits connected to this person? Yes, there are. There's one, vibration 7. So the spirit comes in, obviously then connects to that discarnate spirits and moves them effectively. So they're then moved from that frequency. And then they look for the next frequency. Do we have any incoming streams of negative energy that are hitting the etheric field that we could consider to be curses, hexes, those sorts of things? And if there are, can we basically protect that person? And then the way that we work is we basically mirror and reflect that stream of negativity back to the person that's sending it. And that generally stops quite quickly. So you can see from a psychic surgery perspective, it's a frequency-based healing modality, really, where the spirit guides are going through each frequency at a time to find the problems, perform an intervention, and of course, when they've worked through all of the different layers, then that person's brought back to what we would term sovereignty, meaning that their energy is their own, they're back in their kind of sovereign bubble, there's nothing else in there with them, their frequency is now their own again, and that intervention has been performed and cleared, and that kind of brings them back to a space that they can start to kind of heal themselves, I guess, and get some sort of mental clarity. And this, I think, is where things did get confusing, really, because spirit release therapy, going back in time, was all about releasing spirits, only spirits. So if you look at the SRA protocol, we've got these 20 layers we're working through. Releasing spirits is one layer or one frequency. So there's 19 other things that we do from an SRA perspective. But of course, SRT was all about just removing or you're moving on discarnate spirit. And of course, psychic surgery was all about someone in the day that I did it with Chen initially, a physical person on the couch, in the room in front of you, hands on, spirit guides in, you're in full trance, guide is talking to the person, telling them what they're finding, removing things. That person can feel hands inside their stomach, they can feel things moving around. And we've got, hundreds and hundreds of feedback from clients that talk about snapping sensations, no pain, because the way that psychic surgery is generally performed, of course, is, or the way Chen explains it to me, is that he performs a spiritual anesthetic before they start. So quite often people would say they could feel like an injection in the back of their neck that felt really cold, and that would run down their spine to the bottom of their back. And when that finished, they would find that if they're lying on the bed in front of me, they wouldn't be able to move. So literally they've had an etheric anesthetic applied. So the physical body is still there. They can feel their arms, they can feel their legs. But if you said there was a fire in the room, they wouldn't be able to jump up and run out because their etheric body has been anesthetized, so it's not moving. And again, I've seen people get off the bed in demonstrations that we've done where we've given them spiritual anesthetics. And Chen said, they're not going to allow it to wear off just yet. And that person tried to walk across the room and literally just kind of slumped down the floor. And everyone in the room laughed at the time because it was demonstration. And Chen had just told this person not to walk for a few minutes until the spiritual anesthetic had worn off. But he wanted to jump off the bed and disappear back to his chair. And he literally just slumped on the floor. And we all laughed. It was quite funny because for a few minutes he couldn't get up. So it kind of proved the spiritual anesthetic part effectively. But then if we think about surgery, when people go in for physical surgery, of course we know that there's a medical pharmaceutical anesthetic applied. So you're given drugs, obviously, so you don't feel pain. And the reason you don't feel pain is because the conscious awareness is kind of moved away slightly from your physical body. So you're not that you obviously die, but the spirit has been separated from the physicality, so that the physical surgeon can perform life-changing or life-saving surgery on you. They can take out your heart, they can remove things, and there's no pain because the drugs have basically pushed the spiritual part of you away from the physicality. And then assuming everything goes okay, and you get the antidote to that, then of course the spiritual part drops back into the physical, and then of course you're brought back out of anesthetic, and then of course you realize that you've obviously had an operation but didn't feel the pain. So from a psychic surgery perspective, the same rules apply. Spiritual teams give you an anesthetic, but on your etheric field, so that you can't move. They can then remove and clear things in your field. And at the end of the appointment, of course, effectively your vibration's brought back, and then you can hop off the couch. And obviously I've been doing this for 20 years. So I've seen it sort of time and time again that spiritual anesthetics obviously do what they say they're going to do, and people don't feel pain. And I think one of the big advantages that Chen reminded me at the time with psychic surgery and the way that we performed it was, of course, there's no blood and there's no risk of cross-contamination. So you don't pick up viruses, bacteria, there is no infection. So there can't be an infection because the work is happening in that etheric vibratory field, not in the physical. So again, if we're chopping the skin, we're going into the skin and we're making incisions like a medical surgeon would. There's obviously a risk of bacteria and therefore a risk of infection. But with this type of psychic surgery, it's happening in the etheric layer. So of course there is no risk of infection. And that was one of the positive sides, I think, of psychic surgery. And Chen certainly said to me years ago that this will end up becoming very normal in our society, that spiritual centers have people that are psychic surgeons that people go into to have operations that are spiritual. The medical industry is still required to do medical things. If you break your leg in a car accident, it's no good me doing psychic surgery on you, because obviously it's not going to put that bone back into place and give you some kind of screws or rivets or titanium to fix you. So, physical things still need physical operations. But if the source is spiritual, then of course psychic surgery comes into its own, because it's working in these different vibratory frequencies that the medical system doesn't or isn't able to offer help for, because of course they're looking at the physical aspects, not the spiritual. And that's the distinction, I think, really, from that perspective. So from my perspective, really, to round up my part of the chat, and then we'll get Chen in to see what he has to say. Obviously, psychic surgery is kind of all about working hand in hand with spirit guide teams, allowing them to find the root causal problem. Again, from my perspective, when people book a psychic surgery session and they give us a list of things they'd like resolved, quite often the list of things isn't the actual source of the problem. It's kind of a side effect of it. So quite often the guides will go in and go, no, we've got entity attachments. That's the real problem. The side effect might be anxiety, depression, intrusive thoughts, but the actual problem is an entity attachment problem that needs to be resolved first. And of course, there's the same sorts of things. There's trauma, gateway, spiritual wounds in the kind of spiritual body. And this is the thing, again, from my perspective, really, is that I think one of the great advantages of things like psychic surgery is we as people don't actually run the session. So I'm not really involved in the session. I don't need to find the source of the problem. It's not my job. My job is to hold the vibration and let the spirit guide come in and take over effectively. And when the guide's in working, they're going to scan the field. They're going to look at resolving the problem and performing some sort of intervention. So it's not really for the practitioner to do the work. Whereas if we look at a lot of healing modalities, mostly it's the practitioners that are doing the work. If you go for acupuncture, someone's going to put pins in you in various places. They're going to decide where those pins need to go and how deep they need to go and where they need to go. But the way that we're working hand in hand with these spiritual entities, and we give over our physicality for them to use. And of course, that means they're deciding what's happening. They're deciding what intervention needs to be performed, and effectively they're doing the work as well, of course. And they're also very well placed to actually feed that back to the client. So quite often Chen will be talking to the client and telling them, we found this, we found that, this is what we're clearing, this is what we're removing, and obviously the effect that should have. So it's kind of, I guess it's a different way to think about things. And, you know, like all things really, everything has its place. And I think psychic surgery kind of certainly is a kind of groundbreaking healing modality that's not really talked about as much as maybe it should be. And I think people that are in the Reiki field really need to look at psychic surgery as something that they might have an appetite to kind of move into, because again, it's a different way of working, but it also opens up the healing and the effect and the interventions that can be performed to people in ways that, of course, things like Reiki don't really. Okay, so Sharp Rust is saying you must be good at psychic surgery. You're booked out a month in advance. I think I consider myself to be quite good, thanks, Sharp, because we've been doing it for 20 years. So it's not a 5-minute thing, really, from our perspective. And again, you know, like everything, I think if you're good at what you do and you've been doing it for a long time, then of course you've learned a few things on the way and you tend to have, you know, the confidence. But I think from my journey, really, and Jane's, obviously we've got a lot of time and effort in with Chen, years and years of time, really. And what we want to do is to try to get more people doing the work. I think so many people need help, and there aren't many of us at the other end that are kind of offering help, really. So I think the more people that can be trained to do this type of work, the better things are for everyone. And, you know, I don't ever see, I know Jono's the same. Jono does the same work as me. He's got a website. He offers the same appointments as I do. He works in a similar way with his guide Whitehawk. But we never consider ourselves competing practitioners, because we kind of realize that the whole world effectively is your audience or your clients, really. So we're not looking to book people. And certainly from my perspective, I consider a positive psychic surgery session one that I only do one appointment. So if I work on one person and they come back, then, you know, they might be coming back for different reasons. But normally we should be able to resolve most people's problems with one appointment. And I think that's the big difference between the way that we work when we're working hand in hand with spirit guides, as opposed to other types of healing, is that we're not looking for repeat customers. And to a certain degree, we kind of consider repeat customers to be someone that probably needs a bit more education to look after themselves and understand psychic protection, start to clear their field. Because when an intervention's been performed on their behalf, if they bring their energy back in, protect themselves, they shouldn't really need more sessions. So certainly from my perspective, we're very keen to find as many people doing this type of thing, and obviously help people to learn to do this type of thing, because ultimately it's kind of not difficult when you're connected to guides and you can talk to the guides and you've been through that mediumship development. Most people start off with going to meditation then moves to I can hear a guide or I can see a guide. That kind of moves into mediumship training. That kind of normally moves into sort of Reiki on one side, and then possibly trance courses. So you learn to do trance. I don't actually teach trance workshops, but Jono does. So if any of you guys are interested in doing trance, then head over to Jono Webster's website, because obviously he's doing that. But trance is a good place to start, because in trance you're bringing in these guides, allowing them to take over your physicality, and obviously work through you. And of course, as soon as you can connect to a guide and move into that trance arena and state, then psychic surgery is very easy for the guys to start to do. And of course, that's where we can hook you up with your surgeon effectively. And again, different mediums have different surgeons. I'm quite fortunate that I work with Chen for everything. So when I first met Chen, it was to do psychic surgery. But obviously, we also were doing the work with Dr. Palmer in terms of the SRT protocol. But I know psychic surgeons that have one guide that does meditation, one guide that will do trance and mediumship, a different guide that will perform psychic surgery. So, a medium can have 2 or 3 different spiritual discarnate entities working with them in different ways. So you kind of attract to you what you need. And of course, when you start to put yourself out to do this type of work, the thoughts go out, I'm here, this is what I'm here to do. Spirit hear that and they watch. And then if you start to actually act on what you've said you want to happen, you'll attract a guide that comes into your space. Basically, it's going to connect with you and work with you. And that's what I think is so kind of easy to do, really, from our perspective. If we're teaching psychic surgery, our job is just to connect you with a guide that's going to work through you and show you how to get into the right mental state, and just allow them to come in and start working through your hands and through your body in that way. So it kind of it is and should be quite simple. Again, psychic surgery is kind of, made to sound complex or made to sound scary or difficult. But again, when we start thinking that we're these physical people, we live around spirits every day, all the time. Most of you guys are very aware that the spiritual realm is kind of with us all of the time, and learning to talk to them and work with them should be the next step, really, in kind of human evolution. And I think it's the only way we're going to move forward as a species. We have to kind of get out of this box that is just us in this physical, and we know that we can't see electricity, we know that we can't see air, we can't see lots of things, but we know it exists. And I think the sooner we all realise that we can't see spirit unless we're mediums, but they do exist, and we can connect to spirits, and we can talk to our ancestors, and we can talk to deceased people that have been in our families. And all of the native tribes around the world know this, and they do their different dances and their different methods of communication. It's almost like the Western world's gone backwards, really. And I think we're just at that turning point now, where we're kind of pushing that ball to the top of the hill to realise that we are spiritual beings and we are living in a spiritual world, and we can start working with and connecting with these spiritual entities. So I think that kind of brings my part of this conversation to an end. Hopefully I've explained everything succinctly, really, from kind of how things started for me and how it can work for you. It should be simple. It should be simple to get yourself on a Reiki course. It should be simple for you to get yourself on a trance mediumship course and learn that. And then it should be simple to start to be trained in psychic surgery as well. Although, to be fair, psychic surgery of the way that I used to do it, of course, was in person, hands-on. And then obviously we moved to the remote method again, so the spirit guide, obviously connects to the client's field and performs surgery that way. So it's not in person per se. But again, it should be simple, and I think there should be a lot of people being able to train this, really. And I know that Jono's in that space. So if you're interested in doing either trance or psychic surgery, have a quick chat with Jono and see what he can do. Okay, so let's get Chen in. I think I've covered my part hopefully quite well. Hopefully you've all understood what I've been saying, which will be good. And obviously for those people listening to this on capture, hopefully you've enjoyed that part of the conversation. And we'll hand over to Chen. So just bear with me a tick. Good day to you all. So thank you very much for the weekly opportunity to meet, greet, and obviously have these conversations. So I think it's so important that this becomes normal. As young Andrew has said, working with spirit guides should be normal. You are physical beings, but you animate yourself with your spiritual conscious awareness and your spiritual intelligence. And of course, everything on the planet that you see that has a physical component must have a spiritual conscious awareness. Every fly, every bird, every animal, everything that's living, there is a spiritual component to that. And of course, we've taught and we know everything is vibration ultimately. So everything is a vibratory frequency. So think of sound and sound waves. You can hear sounds and you're able to hear a certain range of sounds. But sounds outside your range, both lower frequency, of course, and higher frequency, you cannot hear. But you know that some animals can hear things that humans can't. So we know that sound is very collective in the way that it works from a human perspective. So coming on to psychic surgery. So as young Andrew has detailed, this is what we do. This is what we call ourselves. I call myself a spiritual entity that, of course, you know as Chen. And this is how I present. I have a personality, which hopefully is quite positive. We like to give positive messages. We like to teach, and we like to lead from the front, as we say. And of course, I've been on this path myself with young Andrew for quite some time, many, many years. Over 20 years, we've been actually working together. But of course, I was connected to him well before he actually even knew that I existed. But this is the point, is that all of you have a spirit guide or spirit guides, plural, that are part of your team. And those guides will do different things with you. So those of you that are interested in helping people and, of course, humanity as a collective species as well, are able to work with these spirit guides as we talk about them, that are part of your extended family, really. And this is obviously something, it was a contract for me that was put in place with young Andrew well before he was even born. So as I watched him progress through his life, obviously there was a catalyst, a turning point, and this is the point that we were actually going to show ourselves. And boy, did we show ourselves to him. The spirit world met him with a vengeance very quickly. And it wasn't long before he understood that he needed to progress through meditation, because of course meditation changes your frequency. When you meditate, all you actually do is change frequencies. It's very simple. Every human can do it. And then, of course, you can do meditation in different ways. So you can follow guided meditations or mantra meditations or other types of meditations, but it's a frequency shift and change. And as soon as you start to meditate, your frequency comes up. This, of course, makes it easier for your spirit guide friends to connect with you and start to work with you. And the way that we do that normally is through thought and telepathy. So we'll communicate with you. We start to put thoughts in your mind or show you imagery and pictures. This is part of the progression. And then, of course, when we're happy that you've reached the right point from a development perspective to do that, then, of course, we can start to do other things. So this is where we can start to come into your vibratory field, and we can start to overshadow, as young Andrew said correctly earlier, your own energy. So think of someone coming in behind you, and you have a zip at the back of your body, starting at your neck, and we undo the zip, and we basically slide through into your energy field. And then if you've put your hands on someone, we can come through and put our hands over the top of yours effectively. And of course, we're doing that in a different frequency. Some say a different dimensional space, but just think of it as a different frequency. And then, of course, we can open up the client's field that you're now touching, and we can look at what's wrong from a spiritual perspective. Is the chakra system blocked? Is there trauma that's been held, created blocks, pain and negativity? Are there attachments, entities, and discarnate spirits that are causing problems? So once we're inside someone's field, that person, the client, we can see, we can then perform an intervention and remove anything that's negative. So all we do from a psychic surgery perspective really is identify frequencies inside the client's field that are not their own. So if you vibrate at frequency 7 and there's anything negative in your field that vibrates at any other frequency, generally lower, of course, because negativity is lower vibration, then we just find those frequencies and we clear them out of the field. And for us, this again is quite a simple task to do. And of course, this is happening in a different frequency, a different dimensional space, which of course is why it's so fast. So potentially you don't need to spend hours on a couch. We could perform the work that we need to perform in a matter of minutes rather than hours, effectively. So you can imagine this type of work could speed itself up such that you could be, if you were working in a centre performing psychic surgery on clients, you could be in and out every 5 minutes with people, which would give you so much more opportunity to help more people. And of course, the guides would be working quite often before the person even lies on the couch. And this is the state that I got to working with young Andrew. I realised that I could actually anaesthetise the person to a certain degree before they even walked into the room, and I could be already clearing their field from an etheric perspective before they led on the couch. And quite often people would then start to feed back to Andrew and say, I know it started already, I booked the appointment. The appointment isn't until next week, but something's already happening. And this is where we started to perform intervention on the client's behalf even before the appointment date, because of course this was an option really from our perspective. And then depending upon the gravity of the situation, the complexity of the intrusion into that person's etheric field, depending how much time we needed to spend clearing that energy and working on them. And of course, from a spiritual perspective, we work in teams, the same as they would in a conventional surgical operating theatre. You have an anaesthetist, you have surgeons, you have helpers, you have nurses, you have lots of people all there together. And if you could see our operating theatre, you would see the same thing. You would see entities around the outside performing a protective intervention. Really, from that perspective, you would find the surgeons, myself and others, actually doing the work on the etheric field. We also have an anaesthetist, again, making sure that the etheric field has basically been what you would consider to be anaesthetized or deadened, so there's no pain. And again, the person that's lying on the bed is fully conscious, just that their field has been opened and their vibration is being cleared as we perform these types of interventions. So again, psychic surgery should be, and probably will become, a very easily adopted practice, because as young Andrew said, you don't need to be a rocket scientist to do this. What you need to be able to do is hold your frequency, hold your vibration, allow your guides to come in to your field, to overshadow your energy primarily, and then to work through your hands. And of course, this can be done remotely, which is where we are now. So when we have a psychic surgery session to do in the mornings, Andrew obviously opens his diary, looks at the session, we communicate. I attend the person or my team. We look at the intervention required. So we go through the list of things that we work through on a daily basis. I will then feed that back to Andrew so that he has a reporting mechanism and is able to catalogue and identify what was found and what was cleared. These negative frequencies are cleared from the field. Obviously, that person then may take a few days sometimes to actually notice a difference. And sometimes this work can take 5 or 6 days before the client will wake up in the morning and think, I do feel different. And of course, quite often, you must remember, people feel worse for a few days, because if they've had a lot of intrusion in their field, and we come in and clear that intrusion out, take it away, then the field has to recalibrate, has to reorganize, the healing levels have to change. So sometimes people feel that their energy has been completely disrupted, because it has been disrupted. And sometimes people have been talking to other entities too that they become friendly with. So when we disconnect those entities and remove them from the field, it feels like you've lost part of yourself. Because of course you've lost something that's been incorporated into your etheric field that's been there negatively. And when it's removed, there's a hole. And of course, that hole has to be filled with energy effectively. And sometimes that takes time for that to happen. And of course, there are other reasons too, when these types of sessions are performed after the intervention, that people may feel worse for a day or two. And this is the same as everything. If you go for a physical surgical operation where bones are broken and you've been chopped around, you wake up in excruciating pain for a few days. You're given morphine and things to take the pain away because it's so bad, because the type of operation has been so intrusive to your physical body. But then generally after a week or so, the skin is starting to heal. The skin is starting to adhere to itself and starting to pull back in. The internals are obviously starting to work again. After a few weeks, obviously everything's basically pulling back together, knitting back together, and healing is being performed. So even a physical surgical operation carries risk of infection, risk of the surgeon doing something wrong or causing a problem, or a slip of a knife. And we know that this happens many times with conventional surgery. So with psychic surgery, we don't have the risk of infection. We don't have the problems of the slip of the knife, because of course this is a surgical operation happening on an etheric vibratory frequency. But we don't get things wrong because we see things very differently, and we're looking to clear negative vibratory frequencies from the field. So it's a very different operation really from that perspective. And I think this is why, again, we need to percolate this information out to the wider public, because of course these types of operations should become commonplace. They should be cheap. We do this work now from a remote perspective, so people don't even need to travel to a practitioner's house and lay on a couch. They of course can still do this if they want to, and many practitioners like to be involved. But for practitioners that are just looking to work through clients as fast as they can, then the remote method, of course, is even better, because we can attend a client that's fast asleep. We can open their field. We get permission from their higher self to work on them. So if you're booking a session for someone else, that someone else doesn't even really need to be known to you particularly, because when we attend, the first thing we do is talk to their guides. We then connect to their higher self to perform permission. And of course, permission is generally always given because we're working for their highest good. So if we're working for the highest good of the client, the higher self will be happy to allow us to proceed. And then, of course, we can enter the field. So quite often, our appointments are taking place for people in different time zones that are fast asleep, which, of course, is better from our perspective, because when they wake up, they'll wake up with a very clear field that's being worked on from a psychic surgery perspective. And, of course, the level of healing will be that much faster than someone that's already awake, that feels moving around, and they're actually doing things. So our preference, I think, really these days is for remote psychic surgery whilst someone's actually asleep. But of course, we can be changing the field while someone is awake as well, because we're working in a different dimensional or interdimensional frequency. And this, of course, is the key. We're not working on the physical. But if we put our hands on someone physically, then there really is the physical connection. And generally, the client can feel things being moved around inside their body and pulled out. And of course, this used to be quite a preference. So when people would book appointments with young Andrew, they would say, generally, will I feel pain? The answer was always no, but you might feel tugging sensations and pulling sensations as we're pulling things out of your field. And this was generally the majority, I think, of the feedback that young Andrew would receive, is that there were snapping and pulling sensations as we were clearing people's fields. And of course, if it was entity attachments, then from our perspective, they're very easy to disconnect, clear and remove. And that brings that person back to a space of mental clarity, peace and calm. So hopefully that explains psychic surgery in the way that we perform it. Young Andrew's quite correct. This should become commonplace. There should be a psychic surgeon in every town and village. If you think about people in days gone by, you had shamanic practitioners or healers of old. Every village and town had a healer that would come out wearing herbs around their neck, would understand nutrition, herbs, all sorts of things. Lots of this information has been lost over time for different reasons, but psychic surgery should be growing because, again, you're working with spiritual entities, and these entities are here to help you personally as a client, also you as a species, you as humanity. We're looking to move things forward. And obviously we know that there are many entities now, both positive and negative, in the space that you call Earth. And our job really is to work client by client, clearing the fields, disconnecting, removing negativity, and allowing the vibration of this planet to continue to ascend. Because as this vibration keeps coming up, which of course it is, slowly but surely, then the negative side is having less and less time to prepare to hold on. And we will get to an equilibrium point, a threshold. So at some point, when the vibration hits a certain frequency, a lot of the negativity here won't be able to sustain itself anymore. And this is where things will change quite quickly. And of course, this is what we're looking forward to. And that day, my friends, is not so far away. So I will say good day to you all. Hopefully we've explained psychic surgery in the way that we perform it and how we perform it, and of course why we perform it. And we've explained that this should be easy. And if you're a practitioner or a medium, someone that's doing Reiki hands-on, or someone that really understands energy, then psychic surgery should be your next step, because it's an amazing incorporation working with entities, spirit guides, that are actual performing surgical operations on that etheric field in a way that you don't see, but you will be measured by your results. And of course, this is effectively all that really matters, is the results of these surgical operations. So I will say good day to you all. Hopefully you've enjoyed the conversation. We will look forward to next week's Chen Chat. Good day. Okay, so I'm back. Just want to look at a few questions here. So Diana Montante, hello Diana, good to have you here. Sharp rest would once month's clearing for a few months be beneficial? I think really, well, again, I think the way we tend to think is one session should be fine really, but again, learning to do some things yourself and sort of learning to do your own protection and keeping yourself kind of clear and protected is our sort of ask really. And we'd like to get to a point that we kind of teach enough people. We obviously run protection courses, as does Jono and other people, some of the practitioners here most probably, that can teach you how to protect yourself from a spiritual perspective. So really, once you've had a clearing, you should be in that sovereign state. And then really you should be able to maintain that sovereign state for yourself. And that way you wouldn't need to be having clearings. But yeah, to answer your question, we have lots and lots of clients that book monthly, quarterly, yearly clearings just to keep themselves in that space really. But I think it's kind of, from my perspective, really it's about going with what you feel. If you feel you need a clearing, you get to know that you do. And of course, the more sovereign you become as you move into a sovereign energy and you have mental clarity, you don't have intrusive thoughts, you feel fine in yourself. When you get kicked out of that space, you know that something's not right, and then it's about clearing your field, connecting to guides, or basically performing clearings in different ways to bring yourself back into that space. So hopefully that answers that one. Nicole's here, good to have you, Nicole. Zane's here as well, which is cool. I think Zane's joining the SRA course. It starts in September, so this will be right in your space, Zane. Hopefully, should be good. You'll say thanks for the in-depth conversation. So very informative and well received. Good, thank you, Zane. That's really kind of you. Vanessa's saying thanks. Interesting, which is good. Tracy, thank you. Thank you for the info. Lots of thanks for the info, which is good. And hopefully, again, we're kind of very keen to percolate out really information in any way that we can to as many people as we can to try and get more people doing this type of work. Because I think we all realise that so many people now struggle with mental health problems, and just about every family probably has got someone that could do with a clearing, whether it be a psychic surgery session for more physical things, or whether it could be an SRT session for kind of more spiritual issues, mental issues and things. So really trying to get more practitioners trained to do the work, and then trying to get this information out into the public realm is our objective really, because I think more people understand this, more people can do it, and then of course the whole snowball will just roll itself, which will be good. And then I can retire effectively, which will be nice. Although whenever I mention the words retire, Chen just laughs, so I don't think I'll probably, or myself or Jane actually either we'll probably ever be retiring from this type of work. But that's our job. That's what we've chosen to do. We've chosen to kind of try to get information out and make information widely available to you guys, people that are interested, people that are listening, people that need help. So hopefully we can do that. Alexandra B, could someone have a clearing but then live with someone who has negative attachments, get reinfected for lack of better wording, and then end up needing another one? Yes, basically. So again, if you think of your field, if you're inside your bubble and your bubble's got negative things in, whether it's discarnate spirits, curses, attachments, parasites, portals, if an SRT practitioner comes in, clears your field, pops you back in that bubble, you're in that protected space. But if you can hold that protection by doing your own psychic protection, so your own kind of ritual in the morning, jump out of bed, do a quick meditation, ask the guides to protect you, a bit of sea salt around the room, that type of thing. Of course, if the person that you're living with is maybe on substance, drugs, that kind of thing, has lots of attachments, then those attachments are kind of like fleas on a dog, really. They're sat waiting to connect to you. That's the problem, I guess. So even though you keeping yourself clear, and again, we tend to find, I think it's true to say, most of the SRA practitioners, as soon as they're trained, the first thing they want to do is to clear all of their family, because they realize that the people that they're around are going to affect them, of course. So if you can maintain your own protection, then you can maintain your family's protection. So you can keep your husband, wife, children, parents, grandparents, your whole kind of family unit clear. And that makes things better for everybody, because then, of course, the negative aspect isn't able to manipulate everyone and cause chaos and problems in your family. And this is obviously what we do. We've got family. I've got 2 children. Jane's got 2 children, grandchildren. We've got parents. Well, my parents have passed, but Jane's mum's still here. So every week we basically do a quick look and a clearing for everyone to try and maintain that level of sovereignty across our whole family dynamic, because we know if we can keep everyone sovereign and clear, even though some of these people aren't interested in spiritual things at all, some of them don't really get what we do at all, but if we can keep them clear, it keeps the chaos out. And that's the key, really, is that we all then are living a kind of happier existence without continual problems and chaos and things like that going on. So it's a good question from Alexandra. Can I clear my family without their permission? So this is the thing, the way that we work and the way we work with spirit guides basically is the guides ask for permission from the higher self of the person. So if I wanted to clear you right now, Alexandra, who I don't know you, but if I thought you needed a clearing, I could speak to Chen and say, right, can we clear Alexandra? He'll go to your higher self to basically say, we're coming in to do a spiritual clearing that's working for your highest good and the highest good of mankind. So your higher self would probably go, yep, fine, no problem. It's a positive clearing for this person, as in for yourself. So basically you get the kind of okay. And this was the method actually that we learned to sidestep conscious permission. So when I was working with Terry, when we first started to work our protocol, quite often we couldn't get permission because people we were trying to work on that were hearing voices and schizophrenic had been sectioned. So they were in hospitals, mental health hospitals. We couldn't talk to them. We had no access to them. The family members were sort of engaging us basically as a last ditch hope to help and booking us effectively. And Terry used to say, well, how are we going to get permission? Because there's no way to talk to the people. And it was Chen that came up with the sidestep and said, well, we don't need the person's conscious permission if we can get higher self permission. So the spirit guide then went to the higher self of the client effectively to get the permission. And then Chen will come back and say, yep, we've got permission, we can carry on, proceed and do a clearing. And that's the way that we work now. And that's the way that we teach from an SRA perspective. All the SRA practitioners know that we basically perform clearings by going straight to the higher self. And quite often, if you look at hypnosis practitioners, one of the big stumbling blocks is entity attachments and discarnate spirit attachments block the practitioner, the hypnosis practitioner, from getting to the higher self. So they're kind of in the middle and in the way, and the hypnosis practitioners can't get past that. Whereas, of course, we've got a spirit guide in spirit that can go right around the outside, completely sidestep any attachment issues with entities or discarnate spirits, go straight to the higher self to provide the agreement and the permission, and then we can then perform the clearing, which means those entities or attachments obviously get cleared and removed. So it's a really good question, actually, but that's the way that we work. And I think it kind of works really well. If you think about it, it kind of circumvents any problems, because if you're actually working with a spirit guide, they're the ones that understand what's happening, and they're the ones that are doing the work. Whereas we as kind of human physical people, if you're a Reiki practitioner or a hypnosis practitioner, you can't get to the higher self if it's being blocked. There is no way for you to do that, really. And if people have got really negative entities or demonic entities with them that are extremely negative, then not only are you trying to get past them to get to the higher self, you'll be attacked by them as well. So again, for hypnosis practitioners, I'm sure if any are listening, you'll know that quite often, more than likely, you're trying to get past an entity and then you get attacked by the entity, which then becomes problematic to you. Because if that entity then attaches to your field and stays with you, you've now picked up a hitchhiker, really, as part of your kind of general practice. And that's why we think that this method that we work, certainly with the SRA protocol, should be a prerequisite to every healing modality. So in our opinion, every single person that's working spiritually to do healing on someone else should be working through the SRA protocol to clear that person first, bring them back to a sovereign state, and then perform hypnosis, then perform Reiki, then perform acupuncture, whatever healing modality needs to be performed, trauma therapy, whatever it is that you do when you're connecting to a client and working them through some level of healing. If a clearing has been performed first, you only got the client to deal with. And of course, they're traumatized and have all their problems and issues. But if those clients obviously have attachments that are negative, especially demonic entities, then you're really up against it, because you've really got something quite negative that has control over that person's mind structure, conscious awareness, thought forms. They're putting thoughts in their mind, probably speaking through their mouth. Many people see that person as a possessed person they're trying to work with. And of course, it's very difficult as a healer to work with a possessed person. And that was where I kind of first saw the power of psychic surgery, really. I had a couple of clients that were schizophrenic, and then when I put my hands on them, an entity popped in and started spitting and kind of tried to strangle me at one point. And that was where I'd kind of shout out to Chen for help. And as soon as I thought his name, literally, he'd come in, basically connect to that person, clear the energy, remove the entity, and then perform his sort of version of healing, effectively, or psychic surgery. And that was where I thought, this is really cool. It's not just about me. I've got this kind of team in spirit that can do this in a way that I can never do it, basically. And I think that's the power of psychic surgery, really, from my perspective, certainly. Okay, so I think that probably brings us to the end of this conversation. It's about an hour and 7 minutes on my screen. So hopefully you guys have enjoyed that. Hopefully we've explained a bit more about psychic surgery and the way that we do things and the way that we work it and how we work. And also we've covered a bit of the SRA protocol as well, which is always good, because lots of people ask questions about how do things work from an SRA perspective, could I be a practitioner, etc., etc. So, and there's lots of information out there on lots of our other podcasts, and you can head over to the spirit-release-academy.com website if you're interested in joining up as a practitioner to do that. If you're interested in trance, ping Jono, because he's got a trance course running, probably soon. I think he's got one in September, actually. And again, if you're into mediumship, then find a good medium that can train you and teach you mediumship as well. Someone that is tried and trusted, that's been doing it for a long time, as opposed to someone that's been doing it for 2 minutes. Because we all know that out in the spiritual Wild West, as I call it, you've got these 2-minute practitioners that seem to pop up, that have done a course and then decide that they can teach. And they haven't been doing it for 20 years. So align yourself with the people that have the experience, because that journey for you will be much smoother for sure. Okay, folks, thanks, Tracy. Have a good week, and we'll catch you all again next week. Cheers, folks. Bye-bye.